A great storm of wind arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care if we perish?" This story of the storm is often called the stilling of the storm or the calming of the storm. And from the earliest days, the church fathers have interpreted it figuratively. Like, for example, St. Augustine identified the storm-tossed boat with the church, the bark of Peter, he called it. And he wrote that as Christians, we embark with Christ on a life that is full of dangerous storms, especially attacks from evil spirits and temptations of the flesh. And in the midst of that, we must learn to trust Christ daily, every day, since he alone can restrain these forces and bring us to the safe harbor of salvation. Now, there are two important details in this story that I want you to notice. The first detail is that the men in the boat were all experienced, professional fishermen. They were strong, self-reliant men who must have weathered many storms on the Sea of Galilee in their career. But on this night, the storm must have been exceptionally ferocious. In fact, these hardened fishermen were so alarmed that they awakened Jesus and cried, "Teacher, don't you care if we perish?" They thought they were going to die. So this was no ordinary storm. And I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Well, Jesus calmed them down, and then he calmed the waves and the wind down too. For he had supernatural power to make the waves obey him. And then he scolded his disciples for their lack of supernatural faith. That's the first detail. And the second detail that I want you to notice, you can only see in the immediate context of this story. Verse 35 reads like this: "On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, 'Let us go across to the other side.'" First of all, notice that the only reason the apostles were in the boat at all was because Jesus had put them there. And it was night. So there they were. And usually we go right past that verse and come and move on to the storm, but we need to ask ourselves, where was Jesus going? He said, "Let us go across to the other side." What was he thinking? Where was he going? Why was he going to the other side? Why did he want to go there? What was there? And then starting in chapter 5, verse 1, we start finding out. So that's important. So here's what it says. "Then they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when he had come out of the boat, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, even with a chain, for he had often been bound with fetters and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the fetters he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him." This was the infamous and feared Gerasene demoniac. Gerasa was one of the 10 cities of the Decapolis. That was a region on the other side of the Sea of Galilee from Capernaum. And there were 10 Hellenized cities, and very Jews lived there. It is primarily a pagan stronghold. And when we read the entire story through, we see that immediately after the encounter with this demonized man, Jesus got back in the boat with his disciples and returned. So the entire purpose of getting into the boat that night was for this encounter with this poor, demonized man in Gerasa. So let me read a little more. When he saw Jesus, when the demoniac saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." See, the journey in the storm-tossed boat is inseparably connected to the story of the demoniac in the tombs. And in fact, the connection is so important that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three those gospels, you find exactly these two stories together in that order, in that precisely that sequence. So, and the stories interpret each other, and here's what they mean. All three synoptic gospels tell us at the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus came forth from the desert preaching, healing, and casting out demons. In fact, in Mark, the very first miracle of Jesus was to cast out a demon at the synagogue of Capernaum. So the point is that the ministry that I'm emphasizing here is that the ministry of Jesus was as much about spiritual warfare as it was about redemption or salvation. In fact, in 1 John 3:8, it says, "The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil." And sadly, the modern church has lost sight of that because of the anti-supernatural bias of the modern church, like dismisses it offhand without taking it seriously. But when Jesus appointed the 12 apostles, what did he appoint them for? Mark 3:14 tells us, it says, Jesus appointed 12 to be with him, and he sent them out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. So to preach and have authority to cast out demons was what he consecrated the apostles for, was the mission statement of the apostles. And that continues to be the mission statement of the church today. Matthew 16:18 says, "And you are Peter, the rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Jesus established the church and gave it the supernatural mission to assail the gates of hell. So doing battle with the demons is one of the chief jobs of the church today. And the demons that we face today are legion. There are many. There are demons like abortion and atheism and pornography and rampant sexual immorality and euthanasia and globalism and anarchy, and it goes on and on and on. And our enemy is the culture of death, as John Paul II called it, which is everything that's anti-life and anti-God. And that, the culture of death, is very real and very powerful. And the only power strong enough to subdue it, just like that demoniac, the only power strong enough to subdue it is Jesus Christ, the author of life. And so we need to remember the lesson of the boat in the storm. When Jesus calls us into that battle, and we are all called into that battle in the defense of life, he calls us into the bark of Peter, the church. The church is Jesus' appointed vessel for our battle against the demons of our age. We can't fight it alone, and we shouldn't try. We have to ride with Jesus and those who follow him and realize that it's the church that equips us for the battle. So the church, it teaches us to pray to God to deliver us from evil. It encourages us, as James says, to resist the devil and he will flee. It promises us, like Paul says in Romans chapter 16, that the God of peace will soon crush Satan under our feet. And it gives us the sacraments that sanctify us and give us the grace and the strength for the job. So why do you think, I'm back to why the storm was so fierce. Why do you think that storm was so fierce that night, that even those seasoned fishermen were afraid for their lives? It was because the legion of demons knew that Jesus and his apostles were coming, and they were coming for them. And they raised a storm of demonic proportions to try to stop him. It's true, when all hell might break loose as when we follow Jesus. And we have to have the faith that he's with us and be confident that when he is with us and we are with him in the boat, he will subdue the storm. For example, there's a well-known story about the power of the faith of St. Clare of Assisi. St. Clare of Assisi was one of the first followers of St. Francis of Assisi, and she founded the Order of Poor Clares, which was a monastic religious order for women in the Franciscan tradition. In 1240, her convent was under attack by a Muslim army. So what did St. Clare do? What she did is she ordered that a monstrance with the Blessed Sacrament was set up on one of the walls of the monastery for the invading army, for the attacking army to see. And then she prayed, "Does it please you, O God, to deliver into the hands of these beasts the defenseless children I have nourished with your love? I beseech you, dear Lord, protect these whom I am now unable to protect." And then to her sisters she said, "Don't be afraid, trust in Jesus." So what happened? Well, they waited, but the attack never happened. And they looked out and they saw that the attackers miraculously had fled. We need to have that kind of faith that Jesus is with us. Even he will be with us this Mass in the Blessed Sacrament. Like the original disciples, we are called to follow Jesus into the storm. He came to destroy the works of the devil, and we, the church, are his body, and we are called to partner with him in this mission. And so we know that the demons we face today are legion, and our job is clear. We need to muster our strength in the church and then follow him into the storm, trusting that he, the God of peace, will crush Satan under our feet. That's the message of today's gospel. St. Peter and the holy apostles, pray for us.